Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Derrick Broze joining me today to get caught up on a ton of topics. Sort of thinking about the way I discuss things with Charlie Robinson as I'm bringing Derrick into the show today. Just we discussed starting sort of around I think it was a GMO discussion, something going on with Mexico in regard to the foreign policy of it all, and we may touch on that today. But so much has changed since last we decided to set this interview up that we decided to kind of broaden it out and just talk about a few different things, including his recent work, which was one of the main focal points. But it really is just worth noting on how seemingly intentionally chaotic the news cycle is, which definitely works to their favor. But Derrick, good to have you back on, brother, to talk about some of your upcoming work and what you've already put out. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I actually, before we get into your fluoride work, as well as your technocratic Trump administration work, I want to give you a quick opportunity to address what you've been working on with the pyramid of power, because we haven't much touched on that on the show, other than a couple of points in, later in the interviews to discuss what you've been working on. So lay this out for people that haven't seen this on my show, maybe haven't seen the work you've done on it, because we often talk about solutions. We talk about empowering yourself and ways to kind of circumvent all of this mind control going on today. So I feel like this is one of the places that I often direct people. So you have the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate that, brother. Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know or hasn't seen, heard me talk about it, this is a documentary series, a 17-part documentary series that I've been working on for the last 5 years. It originally was a presentation I was giving back in 2018. It turned into a 2.5-hour presentation focused on trying to answer, well, really trying to describe the various infrastructure, the people, the institutions, the organizations that attempt to rule our world. And it, as I said, it turned into a 2.5-hour presentation. After a while, I realized maybe there's a better format to do this. And so we started focusing on turning it into a documentary series. And I began releasing the episodes in 2021. And we've released, as I said, 16 episodes so far. So we did it in seasons of four episodes at a time. And the general idea was that we would start really simple and basic. So the first episode's on the education system, second one's on the establishment media, big tech. And it gets progressively more complex and deeper as you work your way up the pyramid, as I describe it. And everything, I will say, as with all my work, is of course backed with sources and documented facts, and all the links are there in my transcript. People can find it at thepyramidofpower.net. I will mention we are in the process of rebuilding the website. So if you look at it on mobile right now, it doesn't look perfect. But if you look at it on desktop, I don't know if you can put it up, Ryan, it looks amazing. We've got this really beautiful 3D pyramid that people can, you can basically, you can use the typical navigation, or you can use this 3D pyramid to sort of select where you want to go. And as I said, each episode originally was intended to be 30 minutes or less. And I think we did that for the first 10 episodes. As we've gotten deeper and deeper into subject matter, it's obviously got a little bit more complex and a little bit more difficult to keep with that timeline. So the rest of the episodes, 10 through 16, are in the range of 35 to 45 minutes. And now we're at the point where we're releasing the conclusion, the 17th episode, which is actually 2 parts, and volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1 is available. You can find it there on the website. If you scroll down a little bit, you should see an enter button. There you go. So we're still getting that sized up and formatted right, but you can kind of see what I'm saying there. Like if you click on any of those, it'll open up the episode. It'll give you a little intro and show you kind of description. So we put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah,
we're going to be turning into.
I like the setup for sure.
Yeah, we're going to be turning that into a DVD menu.
Essentially, what is this for somebody who's never seen it before? So it's a multi-phase, multi-released, essentially not just about information and source material, right? But essentially trying to give people, explain to what you think this would achieve if somebody were to sit through all of it and absorb all of it. What would they gain from that?
Well, I think they would gain. Let's say. Oh, if you're.
I'm sorry. That was on my end. Hold on a second. You've probably been hearing this music play the entire time. Sorry about that. My mistake. I muted my end, and I thought I was muted on yours. So sorry. Go ahead, please. Let me phrase that in case did you hear what I asked?
Yeah, I did. I could hear you. The music was muted. I wasn't muted. I mean, I could hear you, but not myself. So I mean, if somebody goes to this series at thepyramidofpower.net, we also have an Odyssey channel that's got all the episodes there as well. And let's say they are completely new to this information. The idea would be you go from being just a normie, trusting in the governmental corporate systems, to by the end of it, at the very least, you're questioning everything. I mean, that's truly why I designed this and made it in this way, where it could start out really simple and then progressively get deeper and deeper. Because ideally, if somebody's consuming this, by the end of it, they're going to be like, okay, yeah, there's definitely some things I need to rethink and I need to question. Right. And what I was explaining before, one of the things that I really like about the way that this ended up working out is, I tried to make every episode 30 minutes or less. And that was very intentional because I wanted to make it for the, the Netflix generation, for the binge generation. So if you get sucked in now that there's 17 episodes and we're going to be releasing 17 part 2 in the next coming weeks, you could literally just sit down and watch every single one after the other. And I've had a lot of people say that to me and email me that once they discover it, because as I mentioned, I've been releasing it over the last 5 years, but I haven't really marketed it. I've just been focused on finishing it. So now that it's coming to an end, I'm going to be doing more interviews. We're going to be turning into a DVD series. We're going to be releasing a companion book version of it, doing a lot of work to really push it out there. But I've heard everything, people say like, this completely woke me up. This changed everything I thought. Or maybe people who are kind of veteran researchers like ourselves, it's information that's familiar to them, but they're learning new facts along the way, right? Because the whole idea was, how do I take the best information that already exists? Because when it comes to a lot of these topics, like for example, there's an episode on the banking cartels and the Federal Reserve and stuff. There's already G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. James Corbett's got a great documentary. I wanted to take the best information that already exists out there and condense it down, and then of course add my own original research and not reinvent the wheel when I didn't need to. So, show credit, give credit to other books and documentaries out there, do it in 30 minutes or less. And then every episode also ends with suggested solutions. Hey, if you're concerned about big wireless, consider these things. If you're concerned about the food systems, look at these options, right? And so that's kind of the whole idea. It's not just to give people the dark, scary, bad information, but it's truthful, it's honest, it's real information, but also to try to say, here's some ideas and things we could do about it. So now, as I mentioned, we've released all 16, and in the conclusion, chapter 17, it actually turned into a 3-hour documentary. So we decided to release that into 2 parts. So volume 1 is available already on the website and on our Odyssey channel and on the consciousresistance.com. That's about 45 minutes long. And in the final conclusion, where we're kind of answering that question of, well, who is at the top, will be out in the coming weeks. And that features everybody from David Icke, Mark Passio, Larkin Rose, Carrie Wedler, Catherine Austin Fitz is in there, Professor Richard Spence, Adam Green. I know I'm forgetting more people, but it's like Richard Grove. I mean, there's just a dozen or more really talented and really powerful researchers in their own area. And what I like about it, which is surely to disappoint all kinds of people who think they know for certain who's at the top of the pyramid, I have a different, we go through the Jesuits, we go through the Masons, we go through the Jews, we go through all these different areas, the sort of the Satanists, or, people like David Icke who thinks it's some kind of more otherworldly thing. And we give each of them a say. And I look at, hey, here's what we can prove when it comes to claims that it's the Jesuits. Here's what's less credible, and here's what we can debunk. And so if people are coming into this very certain they know who it is, they might be annoyed and say, oh, Derrick's a shill. He didn't point at my favorite enemy. But if you're coming into this with an open mind and really wanting to look at all the research that's available, I think you're going to enjoy it, because I strive to be as objective and to not shy away from any controversial topic, including the claim that it's the Jews, and to really look at that. What are the sources of those claims? What is the history of those claims? And is there any truth to that? And so I'm really excited. It's already completed. My editor's working on it night and day right now. As I mentioned, we're turning all the scripts right now into the book version, which will hopefully be out by Christmas for people who want a physical, book version of it. And I would mention the book, actually, because the final episode turned into 3 hours long, we had to cut a whole bunch out of it to make it palatable, because, the other episodes are 30, 40 minutes long. This one, I figured it's the conclusion. We're going to go big, but still it turned into 2 hours, 45 minutes. So we split it into 2 volumes. But for the book version, I kept everything I included in my original script that was cut from the video version. So for people who are kind of super nerds about this history and research and want to learn all those extra little tidbits that we cut from the video version, that will be included in the book version.
Nice. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is the culmination of like the power structure concept. And I think that's just a fascinating, I love the way you're doing this in regard to not absolute, but really just there are multiple valid opinions on power structures and how these things work. As I think I've come to feel over the years, it's clearly multifaceted. I mean, there's just really no way in any sense it seems to come down to one ultimate thing. And so I just find this very important. And so it's nice that people can, have that gradual build into it. So that's I'm glad for Christmas, by the way. So I have to.
That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, just one more thing on that. I kind of feel like this is, I mean, just in general, this is one of the biggest projects I've ever taken on. I've done documentaries, individual documentaries, obviously articles and other books, but to have something this massive, which altogether is, I think we're over 10 hours worth of content, and it's available completely free. I put it out, there's no charge to watch it. It's not behind a paywall. Of course, if people want to buy a DVD or a book, there'll be cost for that. But I believe that I will probably be promoting this for the rest of my life, because it's meant to be evergreen. It's not dependent on who's president at the time or anything like that. The content will live and breathe, as long as it's available on the internet, or people have a DVD or a book about it. And the other just really beautiful, unexpected benefit that I am just so grateful for is that people have told me that they've used it to homeschool their kids, and that they literally have assigned them, like, hey, watch episode 7 and write an essay on it and things like that. And in fact, earlier this year, back in May, when everybody was graduating from school, I actually got invited to go to the graduation of one of these homeschooling students who his parents literally used the Pyramid of Power for his government curriculum. Nice. And I actually got to go hang out in person and meet them, and, just hang out for a bit and wish this young dude well on his, his life journey that he's about to begin. But it's just such an empowering, really grateful feeling to see that, okay, it's helping people, it's actually reaching people. And that's what I intended.
Right. I love that. I mean, that's like, it made me think of something, in like the contradictions today more than ever, clumsy, obvious ways today between what you're taught, like even like a Christopher Columbus type point, to what we know and can literally discuss. But it's now, the over to Windows move. Like we all know that that's generally not really how that went down with Columbus, for example, but yet it's still like, these are confounding moments. It's kind of what I was touching on, I think, before we went live. It's like, how do we just let that continue? We all know that's not accurate, but yet then you get pushed back from teachers. So my point is that you have these situations right now where what you're teaching, the truth, and I mean, sourced truth about who was involved in what and so on, and then conflicting, or rather contradicting what's being taught in school, and then having that be taught to children, and then having that moment where if they are, the homeschool in this part makes the difference, but let's say they're in school and then bringing that information into a classroom, it's an interesting conflict because you can prove that they're right, but yet they're being taught something else. It makes me think of a thing I'm seeing online right now between, I think it's Dave Crenshaw with the eye patch and Dave Smith. Whatever you think of Dave Smith, the point is he's saying things that are correct about basic things of foreign policy, or just generally speaking that, like, let's say the US government's not spreading freedom around the world. Like, these are childish things we're still spreading. And he points out a basic fact, and Crenshaw responds with like the cartoon US government narrative that nobody believes. And it's just entertaining to watch the response in the comments. He thinks he's standing there with like the whole world behind him, and everyone's like, nobody thinks that anymore. Long point. But what's interesting is to see this contradiction right now between the mainstream desperately trying to maintain that information and what everyone else is coming to terms with. I feel like that point applies to just like everything in the conversation right now. But back to the point, your pyramid of power is that actual information base versus the everybody else, rather the mainstream yelling about it. So it's interesting to see. Have you seen any of that?
Is definitely not the Disney version of history, for sure.
Have you seen any of that though, in regard to the
I haven't seen that with Dave Smith and Crenshaw going back and forth, but I'm not surprised because there's still people out there who try to uphold these different narratives. And I think that this might take us somewhere else, but we'll see where it goes. Like, I think that, like what you mentioned there, as far as Columbus, right? Columbus Day just passed, and some people celebrate, or, Thanksgiving's about to come, right? And some people celebrate Indigenous Day on Columbus Day. And for me, I can kind of empathize and connect to that, because I think it's a way to sort of twist the whole narrative. We've been taught Christopher Columbus is a really great guy, but, sort of historical revisionism, people taking an honest look at him, you realize, okay, he was kind of a plunderer, a rapist, all these sort of things, a murderer. So there's a revisiting of who he was. But then unfortunately what happens is, I noticed that the people who will embrace or promote Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day, they might lean more left or progressive, or, just center even, right? Mm-hmm. And then the sort of right wing, and even some people in the so-called freedom movement, they see that and they kind of look at that as, oh, that's woke. That's all that woke garbage. So let's push back against that and let's embrace Columbus even more. That's like it's just this kind of push and pull. So if the other side's calling out something, even if they're correct, even if the facts are right, okay, Columbus wasn't what we were taught, then there's this like instinct to kind of cling to the narrative even tighter. Like, no, we can't let those woke people take our Columbus Day from us, even if it's like, is that really something we want to celebrate? Right. I don't know. It gets into that whole, into the whole bipartisan fold that is everywhere.
I think it's very much by design, and I think it works both ways. We could find examples going the other direction, and I think what's important to point out right there is, it's a trap, obviously, and it's for I think weak-minded people to think that's we're Democrat bad, therefore whatever they point to is good. It's very, very simple. But what's interesting, if you think of it like with Gaza and Israel, for example, is you have a lot of Republicans who, in other ways, have been calling for no war and peace president, and yet that in a weird contradiction, it's everywhere, are like, yay, colonialism, like that, because the left supports the other side of it. Therefore, we can't be weak snowflakes. So more war, but peace president. It's like there's just so many confounding things in the conversation right now. And I argue again, as a broken record these days, that's why the average people are very aware that it's not what we're being told, which is a positive thing, but it is an interesting time. But so I'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes, including from your website, and I'll include as well your thread and ongoing thread in TLAV, all your different articles we'll get into. But here's Pyramid Power on your website as well as your general
Can I just mention one more thing about the pyramid, since you have that link pulled up?
Yeah.
Actually, that link you're showing there real quick before we move on, I just released that yesterday. As I mentioned, we're very, very close to finishing the final episode of the pyramid, but my editor, he's having trouble finding certain images because, as we know, the internet gets scrubbed and things like that. And so all that video is that you're showing there, the Pyramid of Power crowdsource effort, which people can find at theconsciousresistance.com/crowdsource, all one word. It's literally just a list of some of the different scenes and some of the images and videos he's looking for, and there's an email address attached there. If you're interested in helping us, find some images as we're on the final stages of that final episode, just go to theconsciousresistance.com/crowdsource. Check out some of the things we're looking for. If you happen to see them or know where we can find them, feel free to email us, and that'll help us bring it to a conclusion.
How funny is that? I've dealt with the same thing where I can't find an old clip from a show that I had because it was censored from YouTube, or and you'll find somebody out there has it saved. It's just credit James Corbett. I feel like he's the one that started all of that, and it's fantastic. But so all be included, by the way, and I hope you will take the time to check this stuff out. I want to start before we get into actual just your work in general with the both the fluoride discussion as well as technocracy. But you and I haven't touched on this, and I just wanted to get your brief thoughts. I'm sure we're probably somewhat in the same position, but there is recently an update around Epstein and Kash Patel. There was floating the idea that Kash was going to be fired, but Trump today recently said that he's doing great. But who knows whether that's the case or not. I only include that because I do think that Kash is sort of on the chopping block. But this is a clip where he's basically saying, I'll play it real quick. I think I have it, where he's basically just reiterating that, we're only going to release what we are legally allowed to release, which is not inaccurate, but it's the opposite of what everyone's saying is about to happen. I'll play this, then we can just kind of talk on where you think this is generally going, or it looks like maybe I didn't grab it. I'll grab it right now. But, what your thoughts on where you think the Epstein case is going in general, and, whether you think it's ever going to come out, all the different ways this is being used. Oh, sorry, this is on the screen, huh?
Sure. Yeah, I'll share some thoughts while you get that together. As far as this whole, I see what the clip is saying, that maybe Patel, Kash is not kind of being forthcoming if we're actually going to follow the letter of the law, which has been this whole, saga going on, right? I will say I've seen people saying for a couple of months now that the way that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna wrote the law, I'm sure you've covered this, that there's just a single mention of unclassified in there, that some people say, look, they've kind of already built it in that says they will only release unclassified documents, which is standard procedure. And Thomas Massie actually did address that at the press conference I went to a couple months ago. He basically said, he said, like, if I don't include that, then they're not going to pass the law, because if we just say we'll get any documents at all, whether or not we agree with him or not, I mean, that was his argument. I
get it. No, it's not inaccurate, but I hate that. That's politics, and I hate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. He had to acknowledge, he's like, look, if I don't play the game a little bit, if they think that I'm just going to release anything, then it will never, it'll never see the light of day. And then, of course, the right wing and Johnson and all these these politicos, they play the left-right game, and they were saying for a while, the way the bill was written, it's going to, harm release victims' names, even though Ro Khanna and Massie specifically wrote in protections for victims' names. Right. And then, of course, once Trump said, hey, you guys should all vote for this, they all fell in line, and the Senate did it unanimously. I just hate how much of a freaking game it is. And what I hate even more is how the Q people, which still are limping along, and these other people, and just in MAGA, not even Q people, but MAGA, I know you saw the same things I saw. We're trying to spin it into like, no, this is actually Trump did this pretended to be against it because that's the only way he could get the Democrats to embrace it, which completely ignores the fact that Trump was president in 2016 to 2020. He could have released the files at any point. A president has that power. Like if he could have done it anytime this year, he could have done it day one in office. He didn't need to play some 4D chess of let me be against it to get the Democrats to be for it. So then we'll go ahead and like he could have just released it if that was really his goal. So there's just a lot of bullshit going around when it comes to this conversation. And overall, like, yeah, I'm glad that things are moving forward. I did read an article yesterday how as part of this bill passing, they're even now going back to the grand jury records related to the indictment of Ghislaine Maxwell, which previously a judge had said, wouldn't be able to be released. But now with this new law, they're saying within 30 days, they're supposed to comply within the law. So now all the different courts which have Epstein records are being forced to kind of revisit everything they have and to redact what can't be released. So I think something's going to come out of this. I don't think there's going to be, and I've never thought this about the Epstein stuff, that there's going to be some brand new document with a picture of Epstein and Trump, molesting young girls, or Clinton doing it. Like anybody who's waiting for that sort of thing, I think you've been led astray. But sure, are we going to find more pieces of the puzzle? Yeah, we will. I mean, even with the recent documents that were released by the House Oversight Committee, the 20-something thousand pages, which, by the way, there is one website I found that actually put that into a searchable format, because if anybody who's actually seen the way they release them, it's just file, folder. It's a whole lot to download. There's nothing searchable. I know some people feed them to AI and then try to search, but I did find one website that put them in a searchable format. So you can search, for example, Les Wexner or Jean-Luc Brunel. And you can see all the documents. I've been using that to kind of go through them and see if there's any interesting pieces of the puzzle. But overall, I don't expect any, groundbreaking information to be coming out one way or the other. But nevertheless, in terms of this being an issue that 10 years ago people called crazy and nobody wanted to listen to us, and now it's front page news of all the corporate media. I know we have a lot of skeptical people and people who are pessimistic about anything positive happening. So they think, we're being set up for a whole controlled limited hangout. Sure, probably, more than likely. But I still think that there's a little bit of silver lining, the fact that they couldn't kill this issue. In fact, that for all the team sports politics, and, I'm not saying like Thomas Massey, yes, put all our hope in him and Marjorie Taylor Greene and whatever else. But the fact that Trump lost against his own people, this is really a time where Trump couldn't make this go away. And you don't have to buy into some, he did this to secretly, blah, blah, whatever. Massey and Ro Khanna and Marjorie Taylor Greene beat him. That's just what it comes down to. They beat him at this, and he's pissed off. And, again, I never really liked Marjorie Taylor Greene. I talked to her briefly in September at the press conference. But to see somebody like her stand on principle, and there's other problems with her. She's invested in Palantir and all this other stuff. But in this case alone, I take a little bit of a silver lining to see Trump kind of get defeated here.
Yeah. Well, and I agree that, you can't make sense of it was a 4D chess move, because you can watch the steps along the way. Not only is it not even like congruent, like it's not logically, like this was reactive, but it also made them look really stupid more than once. I find it hard to believe that was the plan and it worked perfectly, So but of course we should consider that. But as it continues forward, and also using the entire history of the Q conversation and all the precedents of how often it never comes to play, it's silly to keep thinking this is the case. But also, let's not forget that Trump, right on time, played into Q all day on Truth Social, retweeting all these Q memes. And I think there's obviously a reason for that. Right.
I think that was done. I said to somebody, because every time something like this happens, the Q people will tag me and be like, oh yeah, so it's a psyop, huh? And I'm like, guys, don't you see that this dude is literally losing? He's getting defeated. His numbers are going, poll approval numbers are going down, and all he has to do is post some Q memes, and then that crowd's like, yeah, look, here it is, it's confirmation. To me, it's just like, of course they know about what Q is, and they're just stringing along people. I've argued that for years, that Trump knew about Q, but not because he's part of some super secret military operation, but because using all the data they learned from Cambridge Analytica, which goes back to Steve Bannon in the first term, they realized how they could perfect their messaging to create this narrative that he was a secret, agent against the deep state. And, every time he seems to be suffering, or, suffers a defeat, like in the Epstein thing, you'll see the Q kind of narrative pop back up. And I think it's just a way to keep stringing his people along so they can try to explain away all the faults of Trump and the areas where he's falling short.
Yeah, I still don't think that's a majority, to be honest, but it's definitely a rabid part of it. And I agree. I think it's just stoked every time. How easy is that? something completely blows up in their face and they go, but Q, and they go, oh, then it was planned. It's like without even like a logical connection to that. It's just that must have been planned, because what else would it be? But yeah, this is typical team sport politics, where it's partisanship. People fall into this. They want a hero, but here's the clip, by the way, that I was going to pull up. And it's exactly what you were talking about, by the way. They're addressing the 30-day window, and then the way he describes it. And I'm glad I just remembered. I wanted to point out that, so the unclassified point is definitely part of that. And I understand the logic to what Massey said. I still don't agree with it. I think it's frustrating. Let them push back on the bill, let them stop it, and then make that the point. You know what I mean? But either way, that on top of that, there was about 3 other things that could slow this down. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I know one was the unclassified point. There was 2 other examples of, like, if there's information that points to, victims, for example. But let's not forget that Massey has this huge, I think there's 20 of them that are there with him going, we want our information put out. Right? They were in that press conference. They're like, we're public. We're putting our face out there. We want that out. Now, there's other people, I'm sure, in there, but then release at least all of the information without their names redacted, because they're saying that's okay. But I think they're using that as an excuse, or just the idea of like violent imagery, which I'm just thinking, like, violent imagery. There's a genocide you're supporting, and you go look at it's on every news channel. So I think there's many examples within that open that door for them to be, we won't release it. Also, just the term national security. I'm sure you saw that too, right? National security. And
that's
then
a huge one. Obviously, they can drive a truck through national security.
Yeah. Johnson came out and said, I think it was right before they went through this, but Johnson came out and said, well, the CIA is supposed to be the one to decide, so they can't even do it until the CIA checks off. So here's the clip, and you'll see how this seems to be obviously set up to be, we're going to give you some redacted pages and say that ends it, like they've tried 4 times already.
Epstein Files Transparency Act has a very tight deadline, 30 days, to produce unclassified records. Will the FBI meet the 30-day deadline?
Well, we are working with our partners at the Department of Justice to produce, as we've always committed to producing, what we can lawfully, legally produce. And we will continue to meet those metrics, reminding the public that there are court orders in place, protective orders, and orders to seal in place.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he's still referring to the Florida point, which Massey already proved only applies to Florida. That's the sealing part, by the way. But I could be wrong and there's something new. But I think he's still pointing to that, acting like that's sealed across the country.
Well, there's definitely some areas that have been sealed, and one of them is including what I mentioned earlier about the grand jury indictments related to Ghislaine Maxwell, because those have never been released. And it is true that typically grand jury indictments and proceedings are typically secret. It's a big problem with grand juries. It's supposed to be for protection, but those never really see the light of day. But even under this new, the passing of this new law, there was an article out yesterday at Courthouse News that was the judge basically responding, and she's apparently going to, she's given, I think, both sides, the government and Ghislaine Maxwell's side, till December 4th to respond, and then she's expected to rule by December 10th. So they still have some discretion in terms of what they want to release, which they could say, okay, we're going to withhold these 3 because of whatever reasons, and we're going to release the rest. So there's some truth to that. But the bill, is now that it's been signed by Trump, it compels all agencies of the U.S. government to release pretty much everything they have, except for those few, or at least they're supposed to be few, very rare exceptions.
Well, and as we both know, that could be everything. It's very easy to couch what you need to be in the places you're not supposed to see. Let me finish this, and I'll make a comment about what I expect.
That legally prohibit the disclosure of information related to any investigation when there's a court order of that fashion. So we're working with DOJ to say if we can produce anything more.
As FBI director, will you commit to as few blacked out sections or redactions as possible?
We always do. We have in our productions to Congress, which have been historic to this year, and we'll treat every matter in the same fashion while also upholding always victims' rights. Victims' rights in any case, whether it's President Trump's case, this case, or any case, the victims' rights statutes are preeminent, and we will protect those victims at all costs.
President Trump told your boss, Attorney General Pam,
the same victims who are calling him out right now, by the way,
Bondi, to look into the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Democrats, including former President Bill Clinton. Is the probe limited to Democrats, or will you follow the facts wherever they lead?
We'll just follow the facts. It's pretty simple for this FBI.
So more charges are possible in the Epstein case?
Based on the new referral, we'll take a look at that and see what evidence comes. But there's an important distinction. The information that the government possesses versus the information that the Epstein estate possesses. Those are two separate boxes of information. And the Epstein estate has not been willing to share information with the U.S. government. And so even though we've requested them to do so.
Okay, let's talk about that last part. Go ahead.
That last part sounds like bullshit to me, because the House Oversight Committee files that were just released last week or the week before, that 20,000 that I mentioned, came from the Epstein estate, because they've been subpoenaed earlier this year. And this is another point I've been making about the people who are claiming it's 5D chess or whatever, that it is true that under the Democrats, going back to Bush, the end of Bush's second term, that's when Epstein first got arrested. Nobody knew about it back then, but if he wanted to, he could have released them. And then during Obama's 2 terms, he could have released any files that were relevant. And then obviously Trump's first term, Biden, et cetera. So it's been both parties. People who try to make it a left or right thing, they ignore that both parties had opportunities. But finally this year, they did subpoena the Epstein records from the Epstein estate. And the estate, I think, has been fighting the release of some files, but that 20,000 that we mentioned, that came from the estate. So his idea that they're not giving anything over, it's not, at least it's not entirely accurate, let's say.
But I don't understand how that legally makes sense. So we're talking about an estate that was seized upon by the FBI because of a sexual blackmail criminal network, right? These are crimes being committed. And he's arguing that they're just left at the mercy of whether they decide to hand over information. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that does not sound like that legally makes sense to me.
No, I don't think it's accurate. And that's what I'm saying. I think he's just deflecting there and kind of trying to shift the blame and say, well, if Epstein and them don't release it, then we can't, if his estate, his brother and family don't release it, then we're not going to get access to it. But you're right. I mean, they, using the force of the government, the head of the FBI, right? This is supposed to be the nation's top law enforcement agency. They can compel them to release all kinds of things, and they have been. I think that he's trying to add as many caveats ahead of time,
right?
So that when the obvious it comes up and there's certain redactions or a lack of files, or people say, well, we got this, but not this, then he can say, well, I told you guys ahead of time. I told you there's going to be these different restrictions, and he's trying to save face in advance.
It's interesting though. We'll have to see how, I mean, I'm sure there could be something that might make that make sense, but at the end of the day, it's how that is used. And you're right. I mean, it really does open another door for him. Do you think that he is ultimately, your opinion, going to be thrown under the bus?
I think it's possible. I've seen the same rumors being reported that you mentioned about him being on the way out. And they said that the mainstream media said that a couple of months ago too. We haven't seen anything happen. There's, apparently been conflicts between him and Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino and stuff like that. I guess we'll wait and see, right? But I think that while the first time Trump was in office and he did get rid of a lot of people infamously, there's people being fired left and right. What they tried to claim back then, well, Trump was inexperienced, and so the deep state put people in there, blah, blah. So I think this time, though, since he literally got his mandate from the American public and built this coalition with all these different people coming together, I don't think he wants to have that same kind of narrative of like, oh, Trump's just firing everybody, when it's the people that not only he claimed he wanted, these weren't deep state agents, that's what we were told. And then these are the people the MAGA base wanted. Remember how big of a campaign there was to put Dan Bongino on there, put Kash Patel, they're going to clean house, et cetera. Right. I think that there's it wouldn't be surprising to see him, get tossed under the bus. But I also think there's a potential where Trump is trying to also save face and doesn't want the people that he chose to look bad, right? Or for him to look bad for choosing them.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I agree. And I think they're playing that's their calculus right now. But, is it worth it? But I think if they had to, I think I would argue right now, someone like a Bondi or a Kash Patel are the ones that are the weakest link, and potentially the ones that I don't think they would care to throw them under the bus. But I think you're right. I think it's an effort to try to make it appear as if this is all going the way that they planned, with the counterbalance being and the rest is just Democrat lies and narratives. But yeah, I do think that I would argue that if this goes worse, if this continues to hurt them, that he'll be the scapegoat. I think that's clear. But yeah, it's a crazy conversation, right? I mean, it's like you said, this is a win no matter how you look at it, because whether it's just this one topic or just the independent media in general, it's pretty clear that the independent media is setting the conversation in many ways. And that's despite having, think of the resources and the influence and the algorithmic censorship, and yet these things are still breaking through. I don't know how we don't stand back and see that as what we're always talking about, Derrick, that this is changing in front of us and they're just trying to hide that for everybody. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about one of those examples. And this is one of these conversations that you are spearheading, that it is a window into the change, right? Is that you could see this happening even before the MAHA momentum, right? Where it was something that, well, let's just even say before Trump. I'm looking at this as like a government, not left or right, because I see it all as one thing, but people started to recognize that these things were not being done for your interest, or that they were lying to you, or like these large ones like chemtrails or fluoride in your water, And so this really did start to open that door. But now with the overlap of MAHA and that Trump's administration, as you've been highlighting more than anybody, is absolutely continuing the same thing. It's a powerful moment. And so you recently put this out. This was today. Fluoride lawsuit plaintiffs pushed back against Trump EPA in ongoing litigation. So start wherever you like.
Yeah, so I won't, recap the entire past almost 10 years. It's been 9 years now since this whole thing started. But for regular TLAV viewers, you guys are familiar that there has been this big historic federal lawsuit taking place, really trying to get fluoride out of the water is what it comes down to. It was led by Food and Water Watch, the Fluoride Action Network, and the attorney Michael Connett, who we've talked about quite a bit on the show. And I do really want to encourage people to go back to the TLAV archives and watch our previous interviews, read some of my previous articles, because there's a lot of layers here. And even just getting to this point where last September, a federal court said that fluoride at 0.7 milligrams per liter poses an unreasonable risk to neurodevelopment of children. That's a quote from the court itself. That was a huge fight. And everything I documented prior to that, which we covered on TLAV, includes the CDC and the oral health division of the CDC trying to hide this report from coming out, the National Toxicology Program report. We had scientists on the inside having to fight to get their report to have the conclusions they were finding. And the only reason we even know about that is because of this lawsuit. So I give a big, big thanks to Michael Connett and his team and everybody who invested in it, because without them being able to go to court and then file for discovery and say, hey, give us access to all kinds of documents, we would have never even known that these scientists in the background were fighting, tooth and nail to keep their conclusions, while other influences, namely coming from the American Dental Association and groups like that, we're really trying to smother this lawsuit and to smother the conclusions of the National Toxicology Program. So in September of last year, when we got this final ruling and Judge Edward Chin out of San Francisco said fluoride does pose an unreasonable risk, the EPA must now act. This is at the end of the Biden administration, of course. And we sort of, we celebrated for a moment, but we all knew an appeal was coming sooner or later, right? So literally in the last couple of days of the Biden administration, whoever was running the Biden administration filed an appeal from the EPA. And again, that was not surprising, was not unexpected, but a lot of people, including, I will say, some of the people, not to talk down to them, but a lot of people, even including those involved in the lawsuit, were optimistic and hopeful that Trump partnering with RFK meant that, okay, as soon as Trump comes in office, he's just going to end this appeal. He's going to,
Can I say really
down.
quickly?
Yeah,
I absolutely felt the same way. But obviously, not because I thought that I just thought that this was such an obvious low-hanging fruit. Like my mind, like I didn't expect a Stargate platform in the first few days, right? My mindset was like, I think this is going to be the easy one they have to do to trick people into thinking, and they still didn't, right? But that's why I agree with that, is that it seemed like such an obvious choice for them, but they just didn't seem to care.
And
Go ahead.
because it would have been so easy. I mean, literally, it's just, hey, let's reverse that appeal and let's let the judge, the ruling play out. The EPA must act. But that's not what happened. In the first couple of months of the Trump administration, it became pretty clear, as I reported back over the summer, it became clear even before they actually filed their appeal in July, it was pretty clear that they were pursuing strategies for like how to continue the appeal. Instead of just coming in, like we were saying, and just reversing it day one or even the first month or first couple of months or anything, they continued to dialogue with the court and say, hey, we need an extension. We need a little more time to think about it. We need a little more time to think about it. And then in July of this summer, they officially filed their appeal and made it clear the Trump administration, the DOJ, because this is the thing for people to understand, and I explained this in the articles, but just in case anybody's a little confused, the EPA is the actual agency which the court ruled needs to act. And of course, the EPA is under the Trump White House, the Trump administration, but it's actually the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi, who again was appointed by Trump, who is leading the lawsuit. So it's the DOJ attorneys representing the EPA who are fighting this. So really at any point now, as Michael Connett, the lead attorney, tweeted whenever he filed his response last week, he said Pam Bondi and the EPA's head, Lee Zeldin, who was appointed by Trump, they could stop this at any moment. They could literally just say, hey, never mind, we're going to drop it. But that's not what's happening. So the Trump administration under the DOJ and the EPA filed their appeal this summer. And then this latest update that I shared here is basically the plaintiffs, Michael Connett, Fluoride Action Network, Food and Water Watch, and the various mothers that they're representing. This is their response. And what they're doing is they're responding to 3 different arguments that the EPA and the DOJ have made, which is basically to try to say that they don't have standing in court, that the judge improperly considered new evidence because there was 2 phases of the trial. There was 2020, summer 2020, which we covered here exclusively, and then there was the 2024 phase. And so even though they didn't object at the time, and the EPA and DOJ's attorneys never said, hey, we shouldn't consider new information. In fact, they were the ones saying, we need the latest data, the latest data. Now, in retrospect, they're trying to argue, oh, the judge improperly considered new information that shouldn't have been considered. And then they're also basically just saying that the court, the Judge Chen, that he went beyond his authority. So these are all kind of after the fact arguments they're trying to make. They never brought this up at any point during the proceedings. And now Michael Connett is doing his best to try to debunk these arguments.
Well, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but as you make clear in the article, they did. I mean, like, it's pretty obvious that the studies were very clearly allowed to be included, unless I misunderstood that. And that
no, that's 100%.
Yeah. And so they're just, I mean, this is like we're talking about the Epstein file. These are just efforts to derail and dismiss and drag this out. Even though it will, or even with immigration, this is such a interesting thing for me to stand back at all of the government action, or just, I guess, this administration, and wonder how in the world they think they can consecutively just blatantly misrepresent the truth in front of a judge, and yet think that's going to work for them, because it's happening in every one of these categories. Just on a big note, I think it's crazy.
Thankfully, I will say I don't have much faith in the legal system, but after having get to interview him a few times and hang out with him at the trial and get to know him a little better, I have full faith in Michael Connett and his legal abilities. This guy is a brilliant attorney and brilliant, knows the fluoride fight in and out, knows the laws, knows the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA Act, in and out. He knows how it's supposed to operate. And he even, in his responses, makes it clear that in TSCA, I think it's section 21, it specifically says that whenever there's because basically, for those who don't know, this Toxic Substance Control Act was passed, I think, in 2015, 2016, and they pretty much immediately got to work. They said, all right, well, this gives citizens the opportunity to petition the EPA if you believe there's evidence for chemicals that are available to the public and exposing the public to harm. You can file a petition. The EPA has to review the petition. And obviously the hope was that this would give citizens more of a say. Unfortunately, the EPA pretty much always denies the petitions, as they did in this case. And that's what led to the lawsuit. But Michael Connett, in his argument, he points out that section 21 of TSCA specifically says that petitioners, quote, shall be provided an opportunity to have such petition considered by the court in a de novo proceeding. And de novo is a Latin term that basically just means that there needs to be a fresh or a new trial without considering any of the previous discussions. And as part of that, that they get to submit all kinds of documentation and make their arguments. And so he's just making it clear to the appeal court that, hey, like, we're not doing anything out of the ordinary. This is how TSCA is supposed to operate. This is how it was outlined from the beginning. And in fact, in the government's arguments, if you were to follow their arguments, then that basically obliterates the whole purpose of having a petition in the process in the first place. And so, I mean, again, I don't have much faith in the courts. I do think he's argued his responses excellently, and hopefully the judge is going to, is just going to deny this appeal, and we're going to continue on. And I'm sure there will be further appeals. I don't think the Trump administration is just going to let it go. But I will point out one of the other arguments that the Trump administration has tried to make is that, as I mentioned, it's Food and Water Watch, it's Fluoride Action Network, and then there's 3 or 4 mothers who are the plaintiffs who have made connections between their child's autism and health problems related to fluoride exposures. And so the government singles out one of the mothers, her name's Jessica Trader, and basically says that where she lives in Kansas, there's already naturally occurring fluoride in her water. And so they're trying to argue there's no way she doesn't have standing to be a plaintiff, because since she was exposed to naturally occurring water, fluoride in the water during her pregnancy, there's no way to determine if any harm that may have been caused to her came from the naturally occurring fluoride or from the fluoride that had been added to the water after the fact. And again, Michael Connett comes back and kind of argues against that, but also points out, like, hey, even if you were to eliminate her as a plaintiff, we've got 3 or 4 other plaintiffs who have standing and are just fine to be a part of this case. But it's clear that the EPA, the DOJ is just searching. They're reaching for anything they can to try to get this case to be dismissed.
And talk about wasting resources and time, and like everything they claim they were doing. We're not going to get into Doge unless you want to about the complete misrepresentation that was. But we're talking about reducing costs in governments and reducing government. You're wasting everyone's time and resources to continue something you are lying about. It's like they just don't represent what they pretend they do in most of these cases. I will point out as well that it's important to recognize that this was on May 16, 2025. Is Trump's EPA planning to continue the appeal of the fluoride ruling, which you clearly argue you think that's the case. So it's worth noting out that you were that far ahead of the story, and to understand that whether Conscious Resistance or The Last American Vagabond, if you're following this, you're going to be ahead of these stories, because that's the kind of work we're putting out. So excellent work on this, Derrick.
Yeah, thank you. And just to that point real quick, not to belabor the point, but because I'll see some people in the comments whenever I might make a similar point that you just did, like, hey guys, I've been calling this out, and people will kind of try to chalk it up to like, oh yeah, your ego's so big, you just want blah, blah, whatever. It's not even about me as an individual. I think the reason I think those points are worth making, because let's say when the next PSYOP or the next presidential candidate or the next politician comes along and tells you they're going to save the day, remember who told you not to trust Trump, and who pointed out Peter Thiel, and who pointed out all the technocrats. And remember, when it came to the fluoride case, who was pointing out and reporting this information objectively. And then also remember who told you to go vote for them, who told you to, that they were going to give you everything and the moon, and, to trust these people. So it's about that. It's not about me being like, oh, look at me, I'm so bright and intelligent, and I'm the best ever. It's about just remembering that if you're a consumer of content, which so many people are, you're watching podcasts, you're reading articles, etc., remember the people you follow, and more importantly, the people you donate, invest to. If somebody has led you astray more than once and told you to trust Trump or trust Biden or whoever else, maybe you should stop paying attention to them. Maybe you should stop following their advice and follow people who are consistently ahead of the curve and correct on these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obviously valid point. And look, even if it is about ego, which I agree it's not, at least in our conversation, that it's still pointing out that it's about correct information. So it's such a weird deviation to be like, it's because the information is provably correct. And I just say it on my show, I say this often, you can say I'm patting myself on the back, but let's just even say that's the case. It doesn't change the fact that what I'm highlighting for you is a long track record of consistently being accurate about what's happened well before that comes to pass. Not because we were assuming or because we were had some secret inside source, because we just looked at the information and gave you our educated opinion based on what we saw before and what we see coming. It's very simple. And your point is to see that consistently and see how continually people are doing that, not just when it's their team, but like we did. And it's not just us, it's tons of other people out there through COVID-19, and talked about Biden and talked about the criminal actions of the government or Obama or Bush before them. And we're criticizing them for the same problems and the same mistakes in the same way, not because of team, but I of the mind that most people are starting to get to that, I really am. But that's, maybe my positive wishful thinking. But yeah, I think that's important.
Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah. So do I. Well, so let's talk about that very point in the focal point of the administration, because I think I'll speak for myself. I think you agree, but I see this as a long-term government problem, and that whether there's varying parts of the partisanship that play different roles or drive in different directions, that the long-term agenda has been pretty provably in a few different similar long-term directions. And one of them, one thing I like you did in the series, the Technocratic Trump Administration, it's not just about technocracy. It talks about Zionism. It talks about, without I think necessarily pointing to the word, a kind of globalist interconnected point. And I very much think those things are interconnected in all this. And so this is an important series of 3 articles that highlights where this is going. So again, start wherever you like on this.
Sure. Thanks for that, brother. So yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of something I could do to write for TLAV that would be a little different than just, sometimes we follow the daily news and the breaking news like we did with just the fluoride story we just covered there. But also I think that because there's so much happening and things are moving at such a rapid pace, I kind of felt like it would be important to do a series of articles, and there might end up being a 4th one, depending on where things go, that would kind of highlight everything that's happened. I mean, we're now here at the end of November, right? So it's been 11 months of the Trump administration, part 2. And things have gone so fast, so rapidly. And going back to, you mentioned Stargate and day 2, right? Not to mention everything that happened this summer. So the goal of this series was to kind of take a step back and to highlight all the things that happen in case you guys have missed it. And even if you're keeping up with Ryan and his broadcast on a nearly daily basis, it's still hard to keep up with everything that's going on. And I made the point in the first one, which is about public-private partnerships, to kind of just look at a little bit of why that might be the case, why things might be moving so fast that it's hard to keep up. And I made two main points there. For one, that Steve Bannon infamously said in 2018 to Bloomberg, I think the full quote is, "The Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." That was his comment. People have remembered that. And then later on, he sort of clarified, and he said, "Every day we hit them with three things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover." So obviously Bannon's not, at least publicly, in the current Trump administration, but he was very much an advisor in the first Trump administration. And I think that mindset really set the tone for the way Trump approaches things. And I didn't include this in the article, but I've since gone back and kind of remembered that also Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, besides being a pedophile, he was infamous for the way that he dealt with the media and his legal strategies. And he definitely taught that to Trump. And it was kind of the similar mindset of like, just sue them into oblivion, just hit them, boom, 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 right after the other. And so we talked about that, as well as now that Trump is starting to befriend all the technocrats like Mark Zuckerberg. We got to remember that Mark Zuckerberg's famous Facebook motto that he said all the way back in 2009 was move fast and break things. Unless you are breaking some stuff, you are not moving fast enough. And basically what I argue here in the beginning of this first article in the series is that when you combine that Bannon flood the zone with shit, hit them, bang, 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 they can't keep up, with move fast and break things, and plus the influence of Roy Cohn, you can really kind of see the mindset that is influencing this second Trump term, which is just to move as quick as possible. You've also heard it from other Trump officials like Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, and others who have said, like, we're going to move fast. We're going to get as much done as possible. And so I just kind of wanted to set the stage that I think that's important. And that is kind of probably why on a daily basis, we're like, wow, this is so much going on. How can I even keep up with it? As ICE is doing these things, and then there's new developments with the technocracy, and then the Gaza, it's a lot. And it's on purpose, guys. They're doing this on purpose because they want us to be overwhelmed. They want us to be incapable of keeping up. And Bannon, of course, frames it in terms of just the Democrats, but I don't think that's exclusive to the Democrats. I think this is just their strategy for anybody that they see as their opposition, is to move so quick that we just are incapable of even keeping up with what's going on.
Yeah. Well, on that one point, I think it's very clear. And you're right. I think it applies to just anybody who might be trying to acknowledge what's going on. I think they're hyper aware that's not just Democrats. And I think that's why that agenda has been so forceful. But it's very clear that there's an effort to, flood the conversation with so many lies and obvious misrepresentations. And that's why I was actually just discussing more than once recently about it's a difficult decision lately for me, where I draw the line on what's important to cover, because I think it's obvious to see that there is an element of that. And so you have to decide, is this Stephen Miller coming out and saying they won a 7-0 ruling, or saying they won it was immigration. They said they won 7-0. The case was actually 0-7. It was one of the earliest examples I saw. And I'm like, did he just say that? And he doubled down and he kept lying about it. And provably they lied about it. And so I wondered at the time, like, was he just that stupid? But it drags you in to this effort and the time and the research. And he's back there laughing that you're wasting time to point out something he obviously was false.
That's definitely the point too. I mean, I think, and so I definitely, I can relate to that struggle you said there, right? It's like I don't do a daily show, I do a weekly show, but even every week when I'm preparing for my show, I'm like, okay, there's this thread, and there's this thread, and there's all this. And like, how much of it is worth giving airtime, giving screen time, how much really matters, and what is just more distraction or just rage bait. And obviously the way we've seen the administration handling social media, they clearly get off on triggering people and upsetting people by just posting the most, I think nasty things they can.
I think that's the same thing. I think they do that in order to get people to kind of flip out and waste time on, which, like, again, there's a value, for example, in pointing out, even intentionally, that they lied. Right. But as I think we both know, I think everyone knows they lie. So it's not really a big, profound moment, but it still is some value to say, yes, they are deliberately deceiving.
Unfortunately, that's become the norm, right? Okay, they lied about something else, right?
But or the point of something being, insulting, for example, or like you're saying, using, saying something to a woke crowd that makes them angry. It's like there's a value in pointing out even that they did it in order to do that. But that's where I weigh every day is, it's like, is it worth the time? Like, if I've got a focal point and I can include it and it's not taking away from other things, well, yeah, sure, why not? But that line comes into play where it's like, okay, you have so much to talk about. And I don't know if you struggle with that even on the weekly part of it, but it's been hard lately because you know that there's smaller, even like the social commentary where you see the Nick Sorters and Benny Johnsons out there, like getting 10 million views on something that you can prove is false. Is it worth my time to prove that?
It is a daily frustration, brother. Yeah. I definitely feel that one for sure. Yeah. And I try not to give it too much energy and time, but I definitely, as somebody who is dedicated to my work, as I know you are, it's frustration. There's just the human element of it too, right? It just that maybe some people in the audience can't fully relate to if you're just kind of consuming and not producing content. But, I've been doing this for 16 years. I know you've been doing it for many years as well. And to sort of see these people come about and just blatantly, and it's not Benny Johnson, Nick Sorter, others, and even these anonymous accounts that are really big on Twitter, they just say blatantly false things, make up stuff about whatever the heck they want. There's no accountability. I'm not calling, of course, or supporting government intervention or something like that, or calling for people to be censored. But it's a very, I think, almost a spiritual challenge to kind of feel beat up by that. It's like, wow, I'm over here struggling to be as objective as possible and stick to the facts. And then these people just don't give a damn and they'll say whatever they want and they rack up 10 million, 20 million views. Yeah, it's frustrating, man. And
one more quick point though, is it's like, this is the point is that they are the mainstream media, right? And it's pretty clear whether astroturf, that's the word I couldn't remember the other day, astroturfed or not, it's clear that influences people, So as much as it is designed to trap us and ultimately is probably flimsy and obvious to many, there is still at some level of value to go, but let me break down for you why that is wrong for maybe the person in the room that just isn't smart enough to see through it. It's so as much as it is a emotional drain and maybe designed to be as much, there's a line for that thing. And that's the struggle, not necessarily because we all could acknowledge this stuff. Like realistically, we should be focusing on the fact reporting and ignoring those kind of people. But if they are genuinely, because they're being held up and because of the algorithms in some way influencing enough people, maybe we need to find a time to call that out. That's the hard part for everybody.
Yeah, I do think there's a time and a place to dissect the psyops like that. And the problem is, and maybe this is just some people, they choose to kind of make this their only thing. It's a full-time job. Like there's literally just so much bad stuff out there. It is a full-time job. If you wanted to be a content creator and say, all I'm going to do is just go through posts made by the left and the right and just show you how they're demonstrably false, you would have your hands full for weeks and months at a time. I mean,
but how is that in a material sense different than doing that with CNN and Fox News?
I think that they both have value, right? Because I mean, over the years, I've done videos debunking, various memes and ideas that were spreading in the alternative media. It's only gotten worse now that we have these influencers, which are clearly mainstream alternative media. They're being propped up, the algorithms control, boosting them and stuff like that. And I think there is value for that because, like you said, there's some people who are easily pulled in with these kind of things. And I see this on some of my pages. Just one brief example before we get back to the article. Last week with the whole Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, right? I made a post about it. I posted on all my social media, but on Facebook, some lady came and commented, and it was just like, it was a long post. Clearly she didn't write it by herself. She copied and pasted it from somewhere. And it was filled with all sorts of falsehoods that I kind of briefly looked into it. And I said, this doesn't seem to be accurate. I wasn't rude or anything. I said, can you tell me where you copied this from? And she said, oh, it's so-and-so, some account I'd never heard of on Twitter. And eventually I found it. It's some person that's got like 300,000-400,000 views. And this particular post about Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to connect her and her husband to Jeffrey Epstein and just all kinds of stuff that when you look at the individual pieces of the puzzle, there's a couple of facts thrown in there, but the majority of it is false. Like, it's claimed that they owned a business, some businesses in Florida. That part was accurate, but the city was wrong. And that business never had any connection to Epstein, but it was trying to say, oh, the business that her and her husband ran was down the street in Palm Beach from Jeffrey Epstein and they hung out, blah, blah, whatever. And those things just get repeated. And I went into the comments and I kind of, said a few choice words to the guy who posted it, but that doesn't get seen by nearly as many people as the people, who saw the original post. But I did go back to that person and say, hey, like, this is clearly false. Like, I can show you where this fact is wrong and this fact is wrong. And maybe that just reaches mainly that one person, a few other people who already kind of agree with me, who come and like it or whatever. But I think sometimes there's time and energy for it. But as we know, there's so much going on. We have to conserve our energy and choose our battles wisely,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, we could talk about it forever. And there's no, I mean, I don't even know. I don't have an answer to the question. It's just, it's worth thought, and that's why I often bring it up, just where that is and where we put our attention into and what is truly influencing people. Is it at this point, with what you said there at the end point, like I question how much of our content is truly being seen, outside of people that know it's there. And it's a hard topic anyway. It's something that we should be considering and I'll end this tirade about the point about where other directions we should go in, Whitney doing print and, other kind of independent, decentralized kind of directions, because this is only going to get worse, as you and I both know. But and then back to technocracy. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll just hit a couple of points. Of course, I'll just invite everybody to find the article series. Of course, it's at TLAV under my name, the Technocratic Trump Administration. The first one, I'll make 1 or 2 points about each article, and then if you want to share any thoughts, Ryan, but people can go and check it. Again, the whole idea was like, let's go back and revisit everything that's happened because it's just moving so fast. Like people probably already forgot if you even saw it, but back in September, Trump had this big meeting with all of the big technocrats at the White House. And I point out that aspect, but also in the first one, I talk about the public-private partnership deal, which as far as I remember, there was a lot of people against public-private partnerships because, the World Economic Forum calls themselves the International Organization for Public-Private Cooperation. And now under Trump, and there's even more development since I wrote this article just a few weeks ago, but there's some that I pointed out that Trump under Trump, the U.S. bought a 10% stake in Intel, which is $8.9 billion. Of course, the American taxpayers aren't going to see any of that money, but their money is being used for that. Right. Trump is promoting this as like it's going to be good for the economy. There was also the Pentagon announced a deal with MP Materials. They called it a transformational public-private partnership, which would see the Department of Defense become the largest shareholder in MP Materials after agreeing to buy $400 million of its stock. And then Howard Lutnick, he's of course Commerce Secretary with ties to Epstein, and there's reports recently showing that his sons, they're benefiting hugely when it comes to finances in terms of AI because of their dad's connections. And Lutnick has said that, they're considering buying more stock in Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Palantir even. And then there was one back in early October, $35.6 million partnership with Trilogy Metals. So the U.S. could have a 10% stake in the company. And that one kind of has its own drama around it because this Trilogy Metals, they're going to get access to this 211-mile access road in Alaska's Ambler Mining District. Okay. And basically the kind of short version of it is that they've been trying to get access to that mining district for years because there's lithium there, there's copper, and there's cobalt. But it was blocked under the Trump administration or the Biden administration or whoever was running the show blocked it because Native communities over there have been complaining and kind of resisting it for years, saying that it was going to do damage to the environment and to sacred sites there. Trump came in, not only and this is the kind of like how that it was all planned is on the same day that Trump announces the $35.6 million partnership with Trilogy Metals, they also announce that they're going to open up this 211-mile road so that Trilogy gets access to the mining. So they literally do a business deal with them, and then they remove all restrictions and undo something that Biden had done that may have been one good thing, and say, okay, now you have full access, right? So
real quick, the regulation point, that's what everyone celebrated that because you act like that's going to remove government restrictions on your life. No, it's corporations and what they can do to you is what they're removing. Go ahead. I just think that's very clear to point out.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the ways they'll try to spin Doge and stuff. It's like, oh, we're getting rid of things that are bad for the people, but it's not going to benefit us in any kind of way, right? It's not going to benefit the people. And in that first one, I also, as I mentioned, talk about the meeting at the White House with all of the big technocrats and Melania's plan for the presidential AI challenge, which just they're embracing AI even more and embracing the technocrats. And I know that you had mentioned to me earlier, there was a new announcement that just happened in the last week with this Genesis announcement. So that's even more of them moving further into AI and moving further into the big technocrats because they're going to make billions of dollars, if not trillions off this. And while they try to move us towards this Agenda 2030, where they're controlling what we can put on our plate and what we have access to and what we can drive and all these sort of things, they're going to use billions of dollars. They're going to use all kinds of water. They're going to suck up local rivers and lakes and stuff in order to power these data centers that they're building under Trump to empower the AI future that people like Elon Musk say are inevitable. So, and in my second one, I won't go into the whole thing, but I do just, again, invite everybody to read it because there's just so much going on. But it was focused on the media side of things, Trump's efforts to pressure and consolidate the media, not just Trump himself, but of course with his partners like Larry Ellison. And we had the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing after Charlie Kirk shooting, where Brendan Carr, who's the head of the FCC, clearly was, and of course he did this on Benny Johnson's podcast, no surprise, where he clearly was threatening. He said, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead." And that all preceded the temporary banning of Jimmy Kimmel. And then, of course, he came back. That's clearly showing that the Trump administration and their cronies will use at least the threats of legal action and to get the ways that they want. And then, of course, we have Pete Hegseth and his new restrictions at the Pentagon. Not to say that the Pentagon was ever some bastion of free speech or freedom of the press or anything, but definitely it's an unprecedented move where all these different agencies are being pushed out of the Pentagon. And in fact, the only people who bothered to sign what's been called a loyalty pledge was One America News. Right. Everybody else, including conservative outlets like Fox, like the Daily Caller, like the Washington Times, who've been there for decades, said, no, we're not going to sign this. This isn't journalism to just basically agree to only release things that the Pentagon approves.
Isn't and then, of course, of the One American News Network, just the new media, like just, oh, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Blind support. Absolutely. Journalism. Go ahead.
Well, and I think there was an even greater example of that. Like literally the next day, I think I did include this in the article. Yeah, I did. There was the White House announced like a whole new round of, after the news made that all the mainstream press, left, right, and center, all of them walked out. And of course, this is where I think very problematic, because a lot of the people in the so-called freedom movement or MAGA, they're like, yeah, look at the pictures of all the media walking out with everything, boxes in hand and sticking it to the man. But that's not going to lead to more transparency. And that's not a defense of the corporate media. It's just to say, like, look, if the people who stay agree to have a loyalty pledge, that doesn't mean that's not going to lead to more truth, more freedom, more transparency for the American people. So yes, we can call out the Washington Post and the New York Times for the lies they've spread over the years. And at the same time, we can recognize that less media in the Pentagon is not going to be good for us. And so the next day, the Trump administration, they announced they had, I think it was 60 new approved correspondents, and it was bloggers, independent journalists, and foreign outlets who all agreed to sign the pledge. And of course, that goes back to some of those influencers we've talked about, like Nick Sorter and others, who are already making it clear, like they're only going to report things that the White House wants them to support. And then I go through some of the list of the different lawsuits that Trump has filed, the frivolous lawsuits. There was a big thing made about the 60 Minutes interview and the editing of Kamala's answer last year. And however you feel about that, the fact of the matter is Trump clearly likes to sue people. He's, for all the power he tries to promote and act like he has, he's like a child. I mean, this guy is just an insecure child who will sue people at the moment's notice if he thinks it make him look bad. And unfortunately, some of these outlets are complying because they don't want to face lawsuits. I mean, obviously, when the government's coming after you, it's probably, even for a big outlet, a scary thing. So some of them are just like, fine, we'll settle. We'll do a multi-million-dollar
it's
payout.
one of the options. It's like, okay, we can get this out of the way, or he's going to make us spend $10 billion to fight him. It's like they know what they're doing, and that's the point of why he's doing all of that, to set that chilling effect. So when they don't have to threaten anymore, just they'll know not to do it in the first place.
Exactly. And then just one more thing on that, or on the second one, I talk about the Paramount Skydance merger, which is of course done from David Ellison, who's the CEO of Skydance. He's the son of Larry Ellison, who is the head of Oracle, ties to the CIA, Stargate. We've covered him ad nauseum over the last couple of years, and particularly this first year of Trump's new administration. And then that piece kind of ends with talking about the TikTok deal. And that's where the third part picks up, which is focused more on some of the Zionist elements. And what I essentially write in this part, which is admitted by Netanyahu himself, that a big reason for this TikTok purchase and putting people like Larry Ellison in charge of that, in addition to getting the Ellisons at the head of Paramount Skydance, I mean, I kind of breezed past that, but just to briefly touch on it, I mean, that puts them in charge of CBS News. That puts them in charge. They bought the Free Press with Barry Weiss, and she's obviously a very pro-Zionist. That puts them in charge of dozens and dozens of local CBS affiliates and Comedy Central, MTV News, things that are going to influence not only local news, but the culture. And so who's at the head of that? Father and son, pro-Zionist. Ellison, the older Ellison, is of course the largest donor to the IDF, the Friends of the IDF organization. And basically this article, I'm kind of showing how the purchase of TikTok and putting the Ellisons in control of it is very much about trying to beat back the fact that many of the younger generation, Gen Z and people on TikTok have largely turned against Israel because of the virility of clips that were going, all around TikTok in the last couple of years. And so now they're trying to get control of it. And, so we get into all the details of that. Some of it touches on Marco Rubio and how Ellison was vetting Rubio for Netanyahu and for Israel way back in 2015. I mean, so this is a long game they've been playing. And then we also kind of talk about the so-called peace plan that Trump has been promoting, which unfortunately just got approval from the UN Security Council last week. One important point, I think, on that, because I was making the point that this 20-point peace plan, as Trump calls it, is truly just a technocratic plan. In fact, it literally says in the dang thing, point number 9, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian community committee. And then it says the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by Trump, as well as other heads of state and former Prime Minister Tony Blair. And I get into some of that with Tony Blair and sort of his long-term connections to the Zionist, and actually how Larry Ellison and Tony Blair have a pretty close incestuous relationship. Right. So, I mean, this whole thing, big part of Trump's administration, the technocracy and the Zionism, it's coming together. Like, that's a perfect example of that peace plan, because you got the Zionists and you got the technocratic, discussion there. This isn't about giving the Palestinian people a chance to chart their own course or chart their own destiny. It's about very much putting more Zionist-friendly people like Tony Blair through the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, people like Larry Ellison and others, so that they can continue to guide the future of what's going to happen with the Palestinian people. And one thing I want to mention just on the peace plan that got approved, it was approved by the UN Security Council, and everybody voted in favor of it. The only two countries to choose not to vote were Russia and China. So all the people who keep telling us that the BRICS nations are going to save us from the Western world order and that the multipolar order is here to save the day, well, they had a chance right there. They could have used their veto power. Both Russia and China have veto power in the UN Security Council. They literally could have stopped Trump's technocratic peace plan, and instead they chose to abstain.
Yep. Yeah, I think it speaks for itself. I mean, obviously, if you want to still pretend that they might have different intentions, you have to acknowledge that that was still a calculated political move to not push back in that moment and allow this terrible thing to happen, because it probably benefits them, even for greater good in the future. I don't believe that, but it's just that this is why I argue politics is always, compromise in politics is a dirty word. I think it always comes to pass. But, I'm glad you brought up the Gaza technocratic plan. It's insane that that's what it's literally called on the surface and how that's all going there. So I really hope people will check out this series. And you've done other work on this, as well as I did a show called the what was it called? The Technocratic Zionist Coup of the United States. And that's what I think is genuinely happening. So I hope people will check this out. So let's go ahead and finish with a part that takes us kind of to where we are now. And you mentioned the Genesis plan. And actually, let me just start with that, because I'll point out what it says, which is perfect to what you were highlighting, launching the Genesis mission. So remembering the COVID-19, World Economic Forum, Great Reset, public-private partnership, as Derrick rightly highlighted, that this is what we all pushed back on, right? In this, it says, and this is generally what this AI plan is, the Genesis mission. It says this order launches the Genesis mission as a dedicated, coordinated national effort to unleash a new age of AI-accelerated innovation and discovery that can solve the most challenging problems of this century. The Genesis mission will build an integrated AI platform to harness federal scientific databases, and it goes on to talk about bringing in scientists and greatest minds. And as we've learned very recently, that's not going to be Americans, most likely, with what they're already showing you. But overall, it comes down to this part that highlights what Derrick said. The scope and outcomes of public-private partnerships, including collaborative research projects, and any technology transitions or commercialization activities. And you please read through this for the show, because it gets into all of the buzzwords and the concerns that we've been highlighting. This, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the central beginning parts of the rollout of the control grid. So you want to comment on that? I want to play the clip first.
Go ahead and play the clip. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the presidential, the executive order there. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about where it goes. This is what.
Wanted to come and be with all of you today to talk about the fact that we, as the Department of Homeland Security, are going to be investing over $1 billion in new technology and new advancements in the security systems at security checkpoints in airports across the country. That is the biggest investment that we've seen in screening technologies in years, in over a decade. And we know that it is our responsibility not just to keep travelers safe, but also to make sure that we're getting them to their locations and to their destinations safely, on time, and efficiently.
And as James calls it, TSA security theater, which is largely what it is. Now, why this connects is, well, first, what this person rightly said. Can you imagine if the influencers outcry if Mayorkas had announced this, left, first, right? But what's interesting to me is that with all of this together, right, the rollout of the biometric thing that we all told you was coming, with the drones and Palantir and surveillance and artificial intelligence, everywhere, Larry Ellison telling you we're going to track every movement and you'll be on your best behavior because we'll be watching everything, and then they roll out this AI grid that's supposed to, it's just, how do people not see where this goes? Well, what are your thoughts on it first before I freak out about it?
Well, yeah, I think, like you said, you're right to kind of connect those two things, because there's, I'm just looking at the details here. It's saying $1 billion for X-ray, advanced imaging technology. Right. This is the same thing, like you said, security theater. This is stuff that started post 9/11 that many people have rightfully called out and said the TSA is not doing a job. I think at one point Trump even pretended like he was going to try to abolish the TSA or the DHS. Right. Instead, they're giving him $1 billion. And I'm also looking at the announcement here from the DHS, and this is something that you and I have talked about for a long time, that on that same day they announced that that $1 billion investment, they also were finalizing the rule to advance the biometric entry-exit system, which will be effective December 26, 2025. And this is, at first, of course, right now it says to collect facial biometrics from all non-citizens upon entry and exit at airports, land ports, seaports, and other authorized points of departure. So that's what Trump said. We've played the clip plenty of times, by land, by air, by sea. Sure. And right now it's just non-citizens, it's foreigners. But are any of us really going to believe that this is not going to be expanded? Because I know, as you're showing right there, these things are already expanding to Americans. Now they're monitoring Americans' driving patterns, looking for suspicious behavior.
Right. And this is what's so obvious about it, right? Border Patrol is monitoring U.S. drivers. So there's no way we can, what it's saying is we're using biometric tracking, face prints, and everything else to monitor you. Not for you, though. We're just checking to make sure you're not an illegal person, but that's not true, to be quite honest. But the reality is it doesn't matter. There's still a privacy overlap right there. And as I've included here, and that Jason Basso's been doing some great work on, this is the flock camera overlap. And I'm going to just play this really quick. It's such a short, so this is all happening simultaneously. And so what this guy says in this video, this is something that Steve showed me yesterday. It's just insane to me. So they're using the same narratives, and it's just kind of the normalization of the rollout of your control grid.
And then unfortunately, there's terroristic organizations like DFLOC, whose primary motivation is chaos. They are closer to Antifa than they are anything else. And that, I think, is unfortunate, because we don't want chaos, or I don't want chaos. I like law and order. I like a society that has a bedrock of safety.
Now, the simple point is he's calling the group trying to stop cameras that are illegally spying on you a terrorist organization akin to Antifa, because that, well, where's that go in your mind? Like, even with the Antifa,
well, I think mentioning Antifa is done very much on purpose, because right. We know which kind of people will, Antifa, yeah, then I'm definitely against that thing. Even if the effort of the flock group is just to track all the places that these flock license plate reading cameras are being established. And, I'm glad to see that there's more awareness on ALPRs, the automatic license plate readers, because I could probably pull up articles I wrote back in 2014, 2015, right, warning about the growth of these systems. And it may be too late in some cases, but I'm glad that there's organizations like DFLOC that are trying to at least know where they're at. And I've seen some cities, some smaller towns and cities, including Sedona, where our friend Grant Presence is from, they actually did kind of beat them back. And so I know people are trying to stop this expansion. It's not a surprise to see that the CEO of the company, of course, would then use some really charged rhetoric like that in order to diminish the efforts of activists.
Well, think about the claim. Like, even aside from the absurdity, I'm glad you picked up on, the designation of Antifa is a whole topic to get into, but it's so clearly politically manipulated. Not to say that there's not, manipulative issues about the groups, but like just a broad stroke label of anything is always abused by the government, as we've both covered our entire lives, But the claim that you blocking or even trying to stop, or rather, here, it comes down to the awareness of it. If you look at the group, they're not, in some cases, yeah, they're talking about action, but if you look at what they're basically doing, he's pointing to like the effort, the DFLOC group is, here's where they are. here's where the cameras are.
They're just
right?
trying to map the locations.
Yes, exactly. And so the point is, he's saying by working to identify where a camera is, which by the way is invading your privacy, is terrorism. Like, that's a stretch too far even for their arguments, but this is just where we are today. It's just worth recognizing the chilling effect of what he's doing right there. Something that in no context is a crime. In no context, it's like saying identifying what ICE agents, who they are, is terrorism, and they're making that same case, even though it's against the law for them not to identify themselves. It's just it's confounding, isn't it?
It is very much frustrating, man. And it's, I hadn't seen that clip, but I'm not surprised, unfortunately. But I mean, this hopefully is painting a more clear picture of people who believe that under Donald Trump, we would see a reversal of the technocratic surveillance state, police state, when in fact it's just been expanding. And again, like that article there from AP and others talking about the suspicious driving behavior. When I see things like that, I mean, it's hard not to say I told you so. And it doesn't make anything better to say it, of course, but it is just like the writing was on the wall, guys. I mean, it was clear as day that the immigration argument, for one, it would be weaponized by one side, and it would be exploited by the right wing to tell you all sorts of horrible things. The immigrants are rapists, they're killers, they're eating your dogs, they're doing this stuff. 3 million, 20 million, 50 million of them have come in with no facts backing those numbers that are just being tossed about.
Right.
And now you get people to the point where they're like, I don't care. Yeah, do whatever you got to do. Get rid of the, surveillance, robbing, taking people in the streets, masked men, whatever, as long as we can get rid of those 40 million illegal immigrants that I was told came here. It's sad to see, but I think, it's not that surprising. And unfortunately, I think those of us who've been paying attention could see where this is headed. And I wish we were ending on a more happy note, but this is the world we're in. And the only way we're going to change it is if we start acknowledging it. And I just want to, I guess, kind of implore the audience out there who I know tuned in very dedicated to your show, share this information. The whole reason that social media is called social media is because we're supposed to engage with society and with each other. And I know that the algorithms can, downrank us and keep people like myself and Ryan from being seen, but that's where you guys come in. If you help us get around the censors, help us get around the algorithms, share this information, whether that's, clicking share on your favorite social media platform or emailing it to your friends or just showing people on your phone or whatever the case may be, because people can't keep up with it. As I said a few moments ago, there's so much happening that people can't even keep up with it. The average person who's not dedicated to this work full time as we are, that's at work right now, it's 2:30 in the afternoon, they're working right now, they're not going to get home till 5 or 6, 7 at night, they're going to be tired, they're going to want dinner, they're going to want to watch a show and go to bed. They don't have time to keep up with this. So all they're seeing is what their favorite influencer or Fox News or MSNBC or CNN are telling them. And even those outlets aren't keeping up with everything's going on. So we need to do our best, and we need your help, guys, to get this information out.
Yeah, well said, man. And I'll leave it with an overlapping point. Hopefully, maybe we should make a point to get into some of the immigration conversation in the next interview, because I think you've got a good perspective on this. But just to end the conversation of Trump saying that the Democrats, whatever their manipulative agenda may have been, which I wouldn't even disregard, stating very clearly that that ignoring an unlawful order is legal. That as a military person, you can disregard an unlawful order. And it's obvious that is the reality. And then them not basically lying about that all the way to the point to where Vance came out and said that they stated you can disregard legal orders, just lying outright, as we just talked about earlier. And then going to the point to where Trump comes out the next day and posts on Truth Social a plaque that outlines that you're allowed to disregard unlawful orders. While, by the way, he's currently investigating, literally today and further, people who made that video. It's just this we're in a really slippery and dangerous time where people are, it's meant, you have to understand, I think, that this is meant to confuse. It's flooding the zone, whatever we want to call it. But interestingly, overlapped with the time where I've never seen more examples of unlawful orders taking place in broad daylight, and this kind of muddying the waters of that. I think it just comes down to constitutional stuff, but lying about deporting or detaining U.S. citizens. There's a lot of different examples we get into. It's just a chilling time for Americans to realize, whether Trump or Biden, that they are aiming at you, as we've always been pointing out. So any final thoughts, brother, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, this is the war on so-called domestic terror. Yeah, just the last that I'll offer in terms of that point you made there, because I covered this on my show on Monday. just to add a little bit more to the hypocrisy, I hadn't seen Trump posting that plaque, and I'm glad Justin and Mosh is calling it out. But if those who can remember this group called the Oath Keepers, which in the last few years, of course, they've been associated with MAGA, but when they first came out in 2009, 2010, 11, under the Obama administration, the founder, Stuart Rhodes, I actually interviewed him back in 2012. It was a group that I was kind of supporting, at least, morally. I wasn't a member or anything, but the Oath Keepers originally said, we are calling on currently serving and retired members of the military, of the police, and law enforcement to retake their oath to the Constitution and to take these 10 additional oaths, which basically said, like, we won't disarm Americans. And the whole point was to say, we won't obey unjust, illegal, unconstitutional orders. And that was a big thing. And then the Oath Keepers evolved into MAGA, and they were there in January 6th, and Stuart Rhodes went to jail. But the point was that was something that the right wingers were very much embracing, and that the left and the center, mainstream media was like, oh my God, these crazy group is trying to get troops to not take an oath to the Constitution again. And here you've got Democrats. And of course, like you said, there's definitely some funny business. Some of the people involved are ex-CIA agents. So they're not people I really trust, but they're basically saying the same thing. Hey, military people out there, don't obey unjust, illegal orders. And then Trump flips out and acts like what they're doing illegal. So, I mean, it's just more, what's good for us, but it's bad when the other side does it. And there's just enough hypocrisy to go around for everybody.
Yeah, I'll add one last point on this, is that, like we kind of mentioned about the consistency of conscious resistance of the last American vagabond. If you've been paying attention over the last administration, or even longer than that, or if maybe just started in this administration, just keep notice of the consistency of the principles of what we're saying, of what we believe in, what we're fighting for, regardless of what party. And only so much time can pass before you stand back and anybody recognizes that there are people who are consistent in principles or their integrity and honor in what they do, and those that don't. And it's very clear who stands out there and continues to compromise and continues to change and jump ship and whatever else. It's impossible not to see that. And I think we're getting to that point right now where, because of what they've done for so long, they've driven a lot of people to become politically motivated, and almost is coming around to bite them now, because people are, before they wouldn't have been paying attention, are now so aware, but have now become so aware that they're going, okay, but they're also lying to me, if I read it right. And I think things are changing to a very positive way, but it's also getting a little bit dark and difficult, and there's so much strife, but don't miss the positive change that's happening within it all, So Derrick, always thanks for your work, man. Always out there doing a great job, and I'm looking forward to talking with you next time. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Number 8, we will finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system, which we need desperately. All talk. Unfortunately, when there is action, it's always the wrong decision. Do you ever notice? In my administration, we will ensure that this system is in place. And I will tell you, it will be on land, it will be on sea, it will be in air. We will have a proper tracking system.